Sitting in for Jerry Taft. Welcome to Channel 12 this week. The Greek philosopher Socrates said, "Know thyself." Today we will be talking to a man who relates self-knowledge to institutional and personal transformation in today's world. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Retail furniture prices are just too...
Well, joining me today is Richard Thieme, president of LifeWorks. His specialties, if that is the word, are speaking, mediating, and facilitating. As a speaker, Mr. Thieme has such interesting mind-stretcher topics as the stock market, UFOs, and religious experience. Also, cyberspace, the search for God, and believing in what you can't think. Richard Thieme, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I can't let that go by. Tell me about how you got to UFOs and the stock market.
Well, I've been interested in all three of those domains. As you know, I was rector of St. Paul's Church here in Milwaukee. I worked as an Episcopal priest for 16 years. So religious experience was clearly a domain in which I was passionately interested. And of course, my own religious experience had moved me into that work. And it came to my attention that religious experience, the way it shows up in people's lives, is usually anomalous. That is, things happen to people, either from without or from within, that don't fit into everything that's come before. They challenge people, the experiences challenge people to the depths. They stretch our belief systems, our way of framing reality. They cause our belief systems to distort, to kind of skew, to try to take into account what it is that is really happening to us. And it became my observation. I've been very interested in the stock market. In several of the churches I've worked at, there have been large amounts of money that were overseen as investments. I've listened to a lot of money managers with different philosophies discuss the stock market. And in reading the Wall Street Journal and Investors Business Daily and managing our own investments, I noticed that people often responded to the stock market the way they did to religious experience, in that there was a phenomena out there, but it elicited such a powerful and deep reaction from the person that it often distorted what was out there and made it very difficult for someone to see what was really happening. They distinguished between themselves and what they thought they saw out there. And therefore, there are a lot of amusing illustrations I have culled from the Wall Street Journal that money managers or analysts have said, which are clearly statements not about the stock market, but about themselves. Experience, it's certainly true about money and the stock market, and it's also true about UFO phenomena. I've been interested in UFO phenomena since I was a kid. I grew up with it since I was born in the early 40s, and the post-war flap really started in the late 40s and early 50s. I was fascinated by it and went to Northwestern when Alan Hynek was active with Project Blue Book and then broke with Project Blue Book. And so I listened to people tell me about their experiences. And when you listen to reasonable, credible, interesting human beings tell you about the one thing that happened to them that had such a profound effect on them, often years ago, that they can never forget it. And you can tell by their expression that something happened. Yet you see their belief system stretch and distort in an effort to try to understand what it was they saw or what it was they experienced. I realized that all three of these phenomena were projective mediums that elicit these powerful projections from us, and that if we can distinguish what we see from what we think we see, it's a deeply empowering thing.
Yeah, well, I want to get to your basic points in terms of transforming individuals, but there's something I just can't let go by. Jung himself talked about UFOs as involving collective unconscious and projections from that. But as he went on in his writings and later in his life, he seemed to be open to the possibility that there was, in fact, an objective phenomena, something out there. And of course, saying unidentified flying object leaves a door open, because there are lots of flying objects that are unidentified.
That's right.
But it seemed like thinking flying saucers, perhaps something like this. Now, are you saying that there, what are you saying?
I'm saying I've listened to an awful lot of people in all of those domains tell me what it is that they think has happened to them. And I've learned through years of counseling to listen closely to discern what is really going on in someone's interior, in someone's soul. And I guess the best illustration of what I think comes from when a man who retired as a full bird colonel from the Air Force and I were discussing the phenomena one day, and I said, you know, all I know is what I read, and what I read is that in your fastest jets, your fighter jockeys chase these things and can't catch them. And it was the only time I saw this man look perplexed in all the time I knew him, and he looked away and he said, well, you're right. We chase them and we can't catch them. And that began my interest in investigating what is that phenomena that they chase and can't catch. So clearly there's something there.
One sees the analogy to the stock market, because many people chase the stock market.
Exactly.
And very few catch it. Is this that kind of anomalous phenomena?
Exactly. And the analogy I use with the stock market is, you know, the Buddhists say that a person looking for their soul is like someone riding a water oxen in search of a water oxen. When you chase money onto which you project all the value there is in you, and then you chase that thing that you believe is out there, as if you think that the possessing of it will give you what you really want to possess, then what you're getting down to is that the quest for money, the quest in search of UFO phenomena, and the religious quest are all at bottom a spiritual quest, which tell us often more about ourselves than they do about what we think is out there.
Well, relative to the stock market, are you saying that the person who has the most toys when they win really, when they die, really don't win?
I don't think they really do win. I think there's a different way of winning. I mean, the way somebody once said it is, what good does it do if you have a whole room full of toys if in the process of accumulating them, you've lost yourself along the way?
Well, and of course that, given your other occupation, is an updated version, I would believe, of what profited a man if he wins the whole world and forsakes his soul.
That's very good.
On that, we will take a break, come back, and discuss seeking your soul in the stock market and related enterprises.
Member Gold.
The soul is the term.
Needs has thousands and thousands.
Welcome back. Joining me this morning on Channel 12 This Week is Richard Thieme, who advises people on transformation and seeking of their inner self. Perhaps the soul is the term to use. And I see a certain similarity to what I do when people come to me and ask for advice on politics. They're thinking of running either party and they ask for some sort of advice, and I say, be like a samurai warrior. Search into yourself to know yourself, because you're going to take a lot of blows when you run for office. You have to be prepared and at peace with yourself. And now, reading the things that you have written that I've seen sound very similar.
That's exactly right. And the work I do with businesses, I do half-day seminars as well as consultations with CEOs and management teams. And that work is, you might broadly call it total quality work, but it's predicated on the idea that as a leader with responsibility for being the source of the transformation of your organization, you must simultaneously be going through a parallel process concerning your own personal transformation in order to be the source of that transformation for your business. Because you know, W. Edwards Deming, in the last book he wrote, The New Economics, said someone had given him the word metanoia as a good key word to explain what he'd been working on all his life with the transformation of business. And I was almost amused by that, because of course that's the word for conversion, the Greek word from the New Testament. And what he's saying really is that the process of ongoing transformation, which everyone involved in the total quality movement is really about, requires simultaneously that a person know themselves, be centered, be clear, and what's often most difficult for leaders is have a place of accountability outside the system for which they're responsible, so they can take their concerns somewhere else in order to true themselves up, like with a truing mechanism, and be clear about who they are. And often when I do seminars, sometimes I ask CEOs if they would just list all the people to whom they habitually turn to discuss personal or professional concerns, and it's often a very, very short list.
Yes, I was just wondering, this sounds a bit like the idea that if you're in economic activity, perhaps you need philosophy to guide you, or perhaps something outside of the system. You listen to a lot of motivational speakers and they talk about really extrinsic rewards, things that the pay that you get or the status in society, because many of the jobs do not have intrinsic rewards. Are you saying seek things that are inherent to your life and to work to find reward, and that will motivate you to grow and develop?
Well, I think you're right. I would nuance it a little bit differently in that I think they're simultaneous processes. That it's a metaphor when you say internal, and it's a metaphor when you say external. That if a person is in business, the way they are going to discover who they are and manifest those intrinsic rewards, which they really can apprehend in the process of being a business person, man or woman, are also going to result in an organization that is, to use a buzzword, is really empowered, in which people do learn to function more and more as a team. The organization comes to resemble an organism that's healthy. A healthy organism is open, evolving, and free. And so is a healthy organization. And one that's not healthy is closed. The information does not flow freely within the system. There are no free access routes to information going outside the system to suppliers or customers or what have you. There's a rigidity. It's bounded, and people experience themselves as constrained or inhibited in the system.
Well, explain to me a little bit about the business that you're in.
Okay.
You're a president of LifeWorks. Tell me, what is LifeWorks, and what exactly do you do now?
Well, I'm working primarily as a consultant and a public speaker. I do keynote addresses for businesses. I did one the other day for a corporation that was formed from the merger of two other corporations to assist the management team in framing what an empowered organization with an open and evolving and free system looks like as they began a day of planning. I also serve as a consultant to CEOs. I've done seminars for top management and retreats, and those all wind up focusing on the one thing, which is my bottom line, which is assisting people in making positive changes.
Probably should give you a plug also. Are you in the phone book?
I am in the phone book. I live in Fox Point. LifeWorks is 351-2321.
Okay, well, we should have had a display on that, but I didn't get it. But if somebody looks up LifeWorks in the phone book or asks for the information...
If they ask for Richard Thieme.
Richard Thieme with an E on the end.
Thieme.
Okay,
That's
then
right.
they can get in touch with you. The question comes to mind because you hear a lot of these things. You were talking about a buzzword, empowerment, and total quality management. And some of these things seem to be sort of faddish. To what extent is fads, or are fads in this area, the threat to real understanding?
Well, I think that's true today, and I think it's always been true. I mean, you're conversant with New Testament times, and you know that there were fads then, and it's sometimes difficult to distinguish that which lasts from that which is transitory and passing. One thing that's clear, it was clear to Deming, it's clear to everyone who's worked in real total quality work, it's not a program. It's not something that you can delegate to someone and have them administer in your company on your behalf. It comes from the source of the organization themselves, from the true leadership, and it requires an ongoing commitment to a process that's going to take a long, long time. It's like going east. There's always more east to go, and you always keep moving toward it. But it is a process of continuous improvement, and you can develop structures which enable people to work together more openly as a team so that you really maximize your opportunity to get the information you need to have in under conditions of such radical change.
Okay. The things I find fascinating talking to you and reading some of the things that you said was this idea of finding grounding outside. And we'll return in just a few minutes and continue this discussion and look at some of those kinds of things that people can do to give themselves a sense of renewal and perspective. Be right back.
We all know about...
We're back talking with Richard Thieme, who runs an operation called LifeWorks, gives speeches on transformation, individual development, and occasionally UFOs and things like cyberspace. We promised people we would talk a little bit about if you're going through transformation at work and empowering and creating organizations where there's information flow and just sort of life juices flowing rather than something stultified, it's important to have grounding in a life outside of that. And it's not just simply recreation or a good golf game, I'm sure. In fact, John Kennedy said, "Show me a man who has a good golf game, and I'll show you somebody who has a seriously deficient life." That's his comment. But I think, what kind of things do you have in mind?
Well, one of the things I've noticed in my own work with systems, and as a priest, you're part of a complex system, and you're always interacting with it from a role. that involves a lot of projection and counter-projection. And what I discovered is that the persona, or the role that you play, is never all of you. It can capture some of you, and if it's working for you, it's an opportunity to express a lot of you. And if it's not, then it starts to feel constraining. But no one can completely fill that. They need to go to other places in order to find out who else they are, what else is true for them outside of that role. And being part of a system always skews you. You can't help but be skewed by the role you play in the system. And if you're the leader, if you're the CEO of a company, there has to be some distortion of how you perceive what's going on that requires some correction. It's what I call truing up. And that's why there are exercises, there are places to go. Depending on your mode of processing information, whether you listen to yourself speak, whether you do it by writing, whether you do it, as you say, just by walking along the golf course, you need to go somewhere else to get feedback. I mean, I say that in the face of the kinds of radical change we're having today, inevitably people are going to behave in ways that are rigid and fearful and isolating. And the antidotes to those three things are feedback, mutuality, and accountability. So part of what I help people do is develop structures in the system, but for CEOs outside of the system, where they can have mutuality, get feedback about themselves that helps them get clear increasingly, and be accountable for their vision.
Well, and I'm wondering also, would this involve kind of thing, there's an old parable of Jason and the Golden Fleece, and at least in this version of it, he fights and fights, and at the end, all he has is a dead dragon. Is that not a parable to the economic situation where you sell the most products, you make somebody very rich, you present a lot of things, but in the process, you miss those things that are important?
Absolutely. And that relates back to when I said that money or the stock market was a projective medium. I remember a man standing up in a seminar I attended once who had made his first million, and he was working on his next million. And the seminar leader stopped him and said, "How much would you have to have before you had enough?" And he thought about it all week. He came back the next week and he sat and thought about it, and I'll never forget it. He finally stood up at the end of the seminar and he said, "It finally hit me how much I would have enough. I would have to have all of it." All of it. And that is a clear revelation of why I say money is a projective medium. The only thing that you can possess all of, and that you must have all of to have any of it, is your own soul. And he was projecting his own soul out there and chasing it like a donkey chasing the carrot. And so no matter how much you had, it was like drinking from a dribble glass. You were just getting wetter and wetter, and you were never getting full. So you can use your pursuit of money, your pursuit of success, as a vehicle to look at who you are and how you're manifesting in the world, how you're showing up in the world to achieve the kind of results you want to achieve. But that's a value-free enterprise. You have to go somewhere else for those values. Capitalism is value-free, but the world is not value-free. And you have to have a place to go to be accountable so you can be sure you're truly aligned with the values that are the highest in your own heart, and they can keep you on track in a very dog-eat-dog world. It's a tough place.
And one notices the workaholic or the fanatic may be very successful in the short run, but often have the problem of being counterproductive or often destroying the very kinds of things they're trying to do.
That's right.
I do want to get back to UFOs and maybe to cyberspace a little bit, though. In that, if I'm hearing you right, there is a world that we take for granted.
That's right.
We have a framework. Even scientists have this. They have a theoretical framework you work in. It colors your perceptions, how you see where it structures it, it organizes it. Something comes along that says, this shouldn't happen. If everything I thought was true is true, this shouldn't have happened.
That's exactly right.
There is a story told in philosophy of science classes of a scientist who found a rock in a valley. He'd studied all his life, and his book had been published about that. That rock should not be there. Looked around, nobody was around. He just pushed the rock out of the valley and solved the problem. I take it you have a somewhat different approach.
Well, I use stories like that to illustrate what does happen during times of paradigm change, which is what we're really going through. The models of reality are being inundated with data that overwhelm them and tell us that it doesn't work. I use the analogy of a man holding an umbrella, which has holes in it, and pretending they're not getting wet. But everybody else can see after a while you're just soaked to the skin. Someone as smart as Thomas Jefferson, you know, when told that there were rocks falling out of the sky, or so some Harvard scientists were claiming, he said, "I would rather believe those Harvard scientists are crazy than believe that rocks fall out of the sky." But if you go to his home in Monticello, you'll see that he had a meteorite collection. So he must have expanded his paradigm to include that, and now we call them meteorites.
Right.
This is happening in every domain of life today, and that's why it is such a high-pressure world we're in. People have a choice of withdrawing into kind of a ghettoized, walled world in which they fight tenaciously for the worldview that they don't want to abandon, or allow themselves to leave their comfortable room and go out there to look at the data, whether it's economic data or metaphysical data or whatever, and let the data speak to us and teach us what it has to teach us. Because if it's a contest between who's right, us or life, so far life has always won.
Well, there's when you in the area of politics, you hear talk about in the Middle East of Islamic fundamentalists. Well, it's a misnomer, but it's something like that. That is, they're holding on to an older ideology, an older view, as a reaction to modern times. You hear academics criticize often religious believers in our time for resisting the modern century. But isn't there the danger that if you do go out into this world and suddenly you're cast adrift on new seas with no moorings and no star to guide you, that you may be worse off?
There is that danger, and I often say you don't know until the journey is almost completed whether you've been going across a bridge or walking a plank. And whenever you leap out into the unknown or move into the unknown, it is frightening. You have to courageously face what I call zones of annihilation, zones in which what you believed deeply may be annihilated, only to be transformed into another way of holding it. You are always on your way into a way of holding things or understanding them, which includes more, is deeper, more comprehensive, and more true. So ultimately, no, I think you can trust the process of life. You can trust the journey to lead you where the journey is going to take you. You don't have to recoil in fear, even though there are those zones of annihilation along every transformative journey through which we must pass. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's a poker analogy. If you're drawing to a sort of a weak hand, you've got some cards, but others are lacking. Might it not be a strategy not to ask for all the cards that you could get, but hang on to some of the ones that might get you through, while still opening yourself up to something new?
Well, they will persist. The true things will persist as part of a pattern which is larger and more complex. I think you see this in the business world. People are not looking at new strategies for responding to a highly competitive environment for no reason. We used to say in the church, economics is the right hand of God. You usually don't find yourself motivated to change how you come to the world unless the bottom line is being strongly affected, unless your self-interest is seriously threatened. And people find they have no choice today but to entertain possibilities which explain more of the world than they had otherwise been able to entertain.
Well, Richard Thieme, thank you very much. President of LifeWorks has been here with us today. This has been fascinating. And thank you for being with us. And with this week's Channel 12 This Week, I'm Wayne Youngquist, Channel 12 News.